Marta, how are you?
Hi, hello, good morning.
Good morning. How are
Okay,
you?
fine, thank you, and yourself and the rest of the audience.
And thank you
Fine, I'm
so
very,
much for joining us. We are honored to
okay,
have you here as a keynote speaker.
okay,
And you can share your screen now.
yeah, sure. Uh, okay, is that okay? Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. Yes, perfectly all right. Good luck. Stage is all yours now.
Okay, so let's go to the start. Okay, okay, can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So hello, good morning to all of you. And I would like to I will try to share with you some of our experience and our thoughts about another aspect of working with patients in clinical trials that is really regarding the patient engagement, and particularly the limits and barriers to actively engage with patients when we are working in the design of the programs of clinical and also research on oncology. So just to set up the background, engaging with patients is not really new. It started a long time ago, particularly in the States at the level of the FDA in 1988, particularly around the area of the AIDS. And this collaboration with patients has been increasing along the years, and obviously is far to be finished. And now we have recently received a paper, a position paper about how to engage with patients. Is now, I will not say mandatory, but it's not far to be mandatory. So there is, we are, going with the patients in a long journey. This situation of this movement of the value of engaging with patients is not only occurring at the States, but also at the EMEA. And here you have also the number of participation of patients in the evaluations of files at the EMEA, and also importantly, the topics in which patients are involved. So obviously is inclusion, exclusion criteria, very importantly, endpoints, quality of life, etc. What we know, so this is something that is happening, but we also know that it's important to have the right time and the right moment to have these activities of engaging with patients. And here you have the result of the impact, comparing when we start to collaborate with patients just less 2 weeks before the submission. That means basically we go for a quick validation of something, or when we start before, and when we have a truly collaboration with them, that is basically a co-construction instead of just checking. So here we have the two extremes, little impact when we go late and we only go to validation, and a huge impact when we start early enough and we have a truly collaboration with patients. So it's not only important to collaborate with them in the design of our research, but it's also important how to do that and which is the best moment of doing that. So how to do that? There is obviously a lot of ways of doing that, publication, but I really recommend this paper because it set a good framework on how to install, to standardize this collaboration with patients in the scope of oncology. And what is clear is when we discuss with patients the content of our research, we can be sure that we will be able to detect the relevant endpoints, and we are going to set up better priorities for the research. We will have a better success and transparency in our research activities. It's easier to identify the opportunities of our program and also to anticipate the barriers. And also it's a very good way to know how to disseminate the findings into the practice. What is happening in oncology? Are we really doing a lot of collaboration with patients? I would say the answer is yes. And one of the ways of measuring that is through the publications. So here you have the number of publications regarding activities of patient engagement in oncology, and you can see how this is increasing in the last years. We are yet at the middle of the year, so we expect to have a projection here. So there is a huge and very relevant increase of the activities, and this is just what is published. And as we know, not everything is published. I think that is very important, and it's I would say it's a learning and self-learning for all of us working on the industry, how important it is to publish what we do with the patients. It's not only a question of transparency, but it's also a way to sharing with others the information and the good practice that we are undertaking and we are developing with the patients. So, as we know, cancer treatment choices are increasing. So there is also a demand for innovation in how to design and conduct pragmatic clinical trials. And at the same time, we need to find a good balance between pragmatism of the trials and maintaining the scientific rigor, which we know that is not so easy always in some challenging trials in oncology. So we have seen that it's important. We have seen that it's important to do that early enough, but why is not yet systematized? I don't think perhaps there is some groups of some companies that they do in all the trials. In our company in Servier, we are still far from that. We cannot pretend to do that always. So there is always barriers, and we need to understand them to try to overcome. So the first barrier, obviously, is the timelines. When we are working in oncology, it's always very challenging, short timelines, and there is always a lot of uncertainties in the research programs. And this is linked to the nature of this kind of research. Also, another difficulty is sometimes the difficulties to identify the right patient partner for our project of collaboration. And also we will see how this impact in the recruitment of the trials. There is also to take into account the complexity of the oncology research. This is a reality. There is also a lot of discussion, a lot of difficulties about the biopsies. So I wanted to share with you one example. The management of data return, which data, in which format, the role of the caregivers, how we can collaborate with them, in which way, and the geographic location. So I will not spend a lot of time about the decentralized trials because I have seen in the program that other people are probably better placed than me to explain. So I will try to focus on another points. So for example, some of the challenges, when we have a project of patient engagement, who will be our partner? So as you know, there is a classical classification of the patient partners. So we can go with patients that they are suffering the disease, or we can go to patient advocates, a patient advocate expert, of a patient expert. So it depends on the type of engagement that we need. We will go to one type of another. So this is the first challenge, is to find the right one. And after, in the case of the oncology, there is really a huge number of associations. And it's not so easy sometimes to decide which associations. All of them are good, all of them are relevant. We have very good partners at local level, at global level. So there is a certain difficulty sometimes to go for that. We need to find a good adequacy with the future study profile. So sometimes the people, the patients that they are ready and willing, they have a good willingness to collaborate with us. Sometimes they may be far from the profile of the people that are going to enter, for instance, in a phase 1 trial. That is very challenging. So we can have a very good collaboration from people, but they will not be sometimes the one that is going to face the challenge of the trial. Sometimes these patients are very sick. They don't want to collaborate. So it's difficult to find a good match. The timelines, obviously the timelines of the patients are different to the timelines of the industry. So we need to be able to match them. The only way of doing that is anticipation. We need to be able also to manage the patient expectations. If you are working, and I know that you are familiar with that in phase 1 and very early phase 2, the patients, they're suffering a very severe condition and they have high expectations. We know the high attrition rate and what could happen with a lot of the trials. So we need to find the good patients, the good language to have a proper and honest management of the expectations. And sometimes this is also challenging. And also how to manage a long-term collaboration. Sometimes we are working in a type of cancer. We don't know if we will have more products in that cancer. So we don't want to have just one shot of collaboration, but how to manage a long-term collaboration. So all that is particular challenging in the case of oncology, and is creating a real and a true barrier. And this is impacting always, obviously, in the recruitment. So here you have a diagram with the classical pathway from the cancer diagnosis to the role of the patient. So you see all these steps that we need to overcome before being enrolled. So first to know if there is a good trial, if the patient is eligible. After is the discussion of the trial, the offer, and also the patient decision. So obviously in the patient eligibility, there is a lot of aspects that we need to consider, and they are really creating a barrier to enter into a trial. Collaborating with patients can help us to increase the level of visibility of the trial, and I made the connection with the presentation of my colleague Jose, saying, if we decentralize, if we go to other geographic locations that are not the classical one, we will have more trials available for those people. We can work with the patients to enlarge the eligibility criteria to have also those patients with concomitant diseases that we need to have enrolled. So the patients will challenge us, saying, why somebody with another condition cannot enter into the trial? If tomorrow you have the product in the market, he can receive your product. So we need to try that. And obviously, this is particularly important to have a discussion with the patients to have the best design, a design with flexibility for the patient and the proper level of rigor that we need in the trial. And how to explain that to the patient. This is all the role of discussing with the patient of the IAF. Say, this is the information that we need to give, what is the level of information that you require, and how to transmit this information. So as you can see here, you have a lot of opportunities to discuss with patients to make sure that there is also a positive impact in the recruitment. Secondly, I thought that it's also interesting, and in our case, or I will come back, this is classically what we are trying to standardize now in Servier, is to have these discussions at all these levels to make sure that we incorporate the patient's insights in our design and that they have a positive impact also in the recruitment and the way that we manage, obviously, expectations and opportunities for the patients. Here you see the concerns of the patients when they are going to enter into a trial. So obviously, this is applicable to some countries, not all of them in Europe, the coast, but it's always important that the transport, the distance, the family support, the feelings of uncertainty, the quality of life that may be reduced. So all these aspects are really a true barrier from the patients. And working with the patients in the design of the trial and how to train them, how to explain the trial, we can help them to reduce this level of anxiety and to give them the support that they need. And on top of that they really deserve. In the end, they are really collaborating with us in the research. So the complexity of the oncology, this is a true barrier because all the teams working on research of clinical development, very often they think, my trial is so complicated, how I am going to explain that to the patient? They will be able to understand that, what they can give you if I need to do all these tests. This is just to illustrate the complexity. If anyone in the meeting today is not familiar with that, that's the complexity of the trial. So here you have the number of procedures regarding the type of trial, the type of agent. But if you see, always we are around 40, 60, 20, is just massive, the complexity. And on top of that, all these tests are complex for the patient. So we are in a truly complex environment, and patients can help to reduce this complexity. But we need to explain also to them why these studies needs to be complex. So again, not an easy task, but this is something that we need to leave that, and really the patients can help us to reduce this complexity and can challenge us to say, do you really need all that test? Do you really need that so often? Because this is something that is difficult for us. An example of this sense is the question of the biopsies. All of us working on oncology, you know how challenging is all the topic of the biopsies. So this is an example of a trial on breast cancer that it was when we have a lot of a high number of biopsies. And there was a consultation with the patients about this topic. And the point was, what is the concern and how can we treat this concern? So we could identify, or they could identify, because there was another company running that, the aspects, the concerns that the patients, they're less likely to accept all that. But there are also a lot of aspects that the patients are more likely to accept. And this is really what we need to focus. Because if they are likely to accept, we need to help them to find the right way to make these biopsies feasible and more acceptable for them. So when you see here, it's not really rocket science. It's really the same thing that we would like to know before taking, going to a biopsy. So when we understand why we are doing the biopsy, what is the value of the biopsy, we try to facilitate the site of the biopsy, the consequences of doing a biopsy. If it's going to be an infection, who is going to treat that? Do I have an access to see my doctor tomorrow after the biopsy if I feel discomfort? We can again reduce the level of anxiety, and patients will accept that more easily. But what is more important, they will feel comfortable and reassuring when they are accepting that. So there is a lot of learnings, and at this moment, for example, in Sevier, we are working on a new trial, again with a lot of biopsies, to try to understand what is challenging for the patients and how we can help them to live this challenge. So what can be done to improve all that? So I have this chart from this Nature Medicine. It's a very recent publication, and I think that is very comprehensive. And we can see the different type of things that we can do to improve our patient centricity and our patient engagement and our design of trials in oncology. So obviously, it's all the activities about amplifying the awareness of the clinical trials. To have a good participation and a good engagement, they need to know that. They need to understand the trials. The trials need to be visible and not only really focus on the clinical side around the investigator. Obviously, he's the key person, the responsible. But if we manage to have a larger visibility, more patients that will be attractive, and they will go to the investigator to be involved. Help also to identify really the eligible patients using database, sharing information, even also among the industry, among different academic institutions, and increase the awareness about the biomarkers testing, because this is going to help really to better identify the patients and try to give the right drug to the right patients. Also, to participate in the co-decision making and obtain the informed consent. So as I said, for example, increase and to improve the remote trials, to work on how to produce the brochures to participate in the trials, the information to be shared, the ICFs, etc. And also, obviously, in the end, and this is important, to accelerate the regulatory approval. So for the patients, how to explain the patients what is the importance of the engagement and how to build a good engagement with them. So obviously, there is these 4 steps, but obviously we can design our strategy in another way. But first of all, is we need to know, do we really need to do that? There is a need for the patients. Do we have a need to involve them in the elaboration of our research? This has to be meaningful. We need to have a good identification of the patients for the particular research. It's not the same if we are working on an ICF, but if we are working on a PRO, for example, or in the design of a particular visit of a trial. We need to identify the right patient, and as I said before, to manage expectations. That is very important. We need also to be very transparent, discuss the roles, the responsibilities, and the expectations. When in our experience, when we work with the patients, we always say from the start, we will try to incorporate as much as possible all your comments. But some comments, eventually, they may not be incorporated. They could have been incorporated because there is a regulatory obligation or because we need this type of visit or this type of test for science. So we always say that from the start. And all the comments that they are not incorporated in our project, we always send them back a written document and we explain why this could not be incorporated. So this is very important to be transparent, and in our experience, they really appreciate that. And also how we are going to communicate, establish good communication lines, say what is going to be the outcome of our discussion, how it's going to be communicated. Obviously, we always communicate the results of our trial, and there is still open. There is an open discussion, I would say, in all the environment, is how to manage the data return to patients, particularly the genetic data. There is not a clear framework in Europe. There is an IME project that has just started. Servier, as many other companies, we involved in that, and we would like to set up a framework incorporating ethical, legal, data protection aspect to really to have a common way of returning the data to the patients at the right moment and at the right way. So again, this is an example coming from a proposal from Canada, and that I think is quite useful. And here we have a model of patient engagement when we are working on cancer. So if we focus, for example, on the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, there is a lot of very practical tips. Is, for example, to discuss with them about the system in the selecting and the recruitment, the optimal clinical sites. I wanted to focus on that because very often the decision about the sites is coming from the sponsor and the clinical site, but we don't discuss so much that with the patients. And the patients, they have a very good knowledge of the clinical sites, they have experience with different doctors, and we can gather very useful information about that. Obviously, we need to provide education, provide support to the patient, the environment, the family, the community, because sometimes a trial is coming in a challenging moment of the life. The trial has an impact on the patient, but also on the family. So we need also to give information to educate the family. We need also to work with them in any adaptation, modification during the trial, etc. And also, why not to involve them to participate in the risk-benefit assessment at the end of the trial. And obviously, there is also another activities and other moments of the projects. So almost to finish, there is some practical tips, recommendations when we are working with patient in the context of patient engagement. That is when we develop our programs, is really make sure that our trial design could incorporate the views of all stakeholders. So that means the investigators is always the case, our clinical expert, the regulatory people, and the patients. So this is very important to ensure a good and transparency communication and to make sure that we incorporate the opinions of all of them. When we engage with the patients, we need to use the appropriate qualitative methodology. Sometimes it could be a questionnaire, but very often, much more often, is a focus group. If we are in a context of a very sensitive topic, sometimes a focus group is a bit challenging. People, they don't want to share with the other. So in that case, we can go to individual interviews, deep interviews. So a good knowledge of the qualitative methodology is very important. Very often the clinical teams are very strong on qualitative methodology, but not so much on qualitative. When we are working in the design of a trial, we need to make sure that we don't have any conflict of interest, and we don't have a role of gatekeeper of anyone. So when we incorporate clinical experts, we need to avoid a conflict of interest with the patients, because it could be very easy to drive the discussion to one point, and the patients, they can feel a bit overwhelmed and not feel free to say, okay, maybe very scientific, but this is just not feasible for us. So make sure that we have also independent researchers in the discussion. We need to have very good background training information to give in advance. People, they need to go to the meetings well prepared. The investigators, the clinical team, obviously is their knowledge, they know. So we need to take particularly attention to the information given to the patients. Obviously, covering the traveling costs. Fair market value can be challenging in some countries, but we have more and more clarity about how to manage that. The patient feedback is, as I say, mandatory. Accountability, it has to be representative. We need to give enough time for the discussion, negotiation, and the preparation. And this is a recommendation coming from this publication that we can disagree or not. I don't think that this really has to be always by the book to have a minimum of 2 patients and a patient advocate, but at least to have patients and patients advocates together is important. The patient advocate represents a group often, and the patient itself represents to somebody living with the condition. So the good mix is always very useful. More complicated, more challenging, but that's a general recommendation. So in the end, I think that also in oncology, we are moving from a model in which we have the pharma companies, the regulators, the investigators, the healthcare professionals, and after the patients were coming after just to be enrolled in the trials, to a more participative model, also in oncology, in which the patients are really part of the discussions, and there are also another stakeholder with the same, we say, roles and views of the others. So thank you very much, and then happy to take any questions in terms.